Good morning. We're going to work on Intacct closing prior year encumbrances today. We're going to look at how encumbrances are created, how encumbrances are released, and then go through how to find our purchase orders, contract service purchase orders, all that stuff that's still open and needs our attention. We're going to look at converted closing partial POs with an eye on FY21 because it looks like we've closed some FY21 purchase orders but used the wrong date. So we're going to look at how to fix that. If you have questions along the way, please use the chat box in the bottom right of the screen. As we do this, we're going to go through some of the reports that are useful or that I find helpful when I'm asked to help people find their balances or what's contributing to a balance in their encumbrances. So how our encumbrances are created, it's from these transactions on screen: standard purchase requisition, contract service requisition, indirect cost voucher request, travel request, and a document called confirm vendor amounts, which is our travel request vendor payment. So anytime we get full-on approval from these documents, that's when our encumbrance is created. So if we're looking for an encumbrance balance, more than likely these things are going to be our culprits that we need to look for. And more importantly, these are the states that we're going to be looking at once we hop into Intacct. If a purchase requisition says it's pending, we know that we've gotten approval, we know that an encumbrance has been created, but as a program user, we haven't taken the next step to convert it to a purchase order, which also means we potentially have an unpaid vendor sitting out there. The same thing goes for contract service requisitions. If it's pending, we've gotten all the approvals, we've gotten the encumbrance created, but we haven't taken the next steps to get this cleared, whether it's by closing it or paying it. POs or contract service POs, if they're pending, partially converted, drafted, or in progress, that still means we have work to do, so we expect to still have encumbrances for any of those documents. Same thing for indirect cost voucher requests that are pending or partially converted. And then finally, travel requests and confirm vendor amounts, if those are pending. They haven't gone through the flow yet to start being cleared from the encumbrance bookings. So we're going to look for some of these here in Intacct. When we create an encumbrance, it's totally based on the purchase document. The date the request is made, meaning the date on the document, not the date it was approved, not necessarily the date it was prepared. It's the date that was on the document. So if we look at purchase requisition, we have this all stop request here. It's this date that controls when the encumbrance is created. When we prepare a request, it always defaults to the current day. But if we were to change that date for any reason, that date's going to control when the encumbrance is created, so when it appears on our financial reports. And it doesn't matter what the day it was that we did this or what day it was that it was approved. That's the date that controls the journal entry that's made for this. And of course, the stuff we use for our program, funding source, checkbooks, the line item, vendor, class, any of those dimensions that are used are included in the journal entry to create the encumbrance. And then the price column determines the total amount of the encumbrance that's going to be created. Not the quantity column, which can be confusing for the blanket purchase orders, but just the total price. And here's the journal entry that is made. It'll debit our expense account that we used, and it's going to credit the encumbrance control. So this one we're looking at here is using 77480 Health Programs Dietary. So once this gets fully approved, it's currently partially approved, the journal entry is going to debit this account number for $800 and then credit the encumbrance control for $800 using all these different things that are on the document: the class, the checkbook, funding source, program, and the vendor, using this date. So how do we get those released? Basically these documents here, through a voucher, a justification workflow, a travel reconciliation, canceling a trip, or through closed partial purchase order. When we process these and they get fully approved, the encumbrance can then be released. But it isn't until that happens will the encumbrance go away. So when we're looking for the actions we've taken to try and release an encumbrance, if we see a voucher that's submitted, partially approved, declined, or in draft, that's our signal the encumbrance isn't released for that purchase order yet. That voucher has yet to go all the way through the workflow to become approved, or the state we would see in Intacct is closed. Same thing for a justification workflow. Paid travel advance, travel reconciliation, and confirmed vendor amounts. If those things aren't closed, or in the case of travel rec and confirmed vendor amounts converted, those are telling us that there's encumbrances that haven't cleared yet. And so there's additional steps we have to take. This one uses the same concept as creating the encumbrance. It's just the reverse. It's going to clear the encumbrance by crediting the expense account and debiting the encumbrance control to offset what was originally done. So as long as we've used all the same original stuff, the vendor, the program, funding source, checkbook, line item, class, everything will clear properly. All right, now we're going to get into Intacct. If you have questions, please use the chat box on your screen. So when we find our open encumbrances, typically we're going to start by researching, which the most common way for us to do that is a financial report. We're going to go to the report center. And we might use the fiscal year expense one funding source view report. Enter our program, checkbook, funding source. And if we're looking for information for fiscal year 21, the date is November 4th. So that's the date that's filled in up here. But if I want something from FY21, I'm changing this date to the last day of fiscal year 21 so I can get that financial information, and we'll let that report run. Back to our report though, the financial report's going to give us the total encumbrances for the line item and funding source. We're not going to know what the vendor is. So this is a great report for getting our balance. The amount down here, we know office supplies is a $300 encumbrance as of 9/30/2021. So that's going to be the focus of our first look through here is how are we going to find out what that encumbrance is for? And where can we find it in our purchasing workflow? So this is probably the report most of us are using. There is another report called Encumbrances by Vendor, which is a financial report. This is going to give us the balances by vendor and funding source. So for those of you listening, if you're using that report now, you're getting a little bit leg up on identifying what our encumbrances are. So that is also under the report center. So we can use encumbrances by vendor for a fiscal year, or if you have a grant that lasts multiple years, you might use life to date. So I'm using a general fund one, so we're going to use fiscal year. We know this date needs to be in fiscal year 21, so that's the first thing I'm doing is making that change. Entering our program, checkbook, funding source combination. If you have multiple funding sources, you could use one checkbook or all checkbooks. If you want all the funds to show up, this report's going to display any funding source you have through your program and checkbook combination. So while this report runs, we're going to get the balance by vendor and funding source. We're not going to get the line item like we did in the first one. So these reports are both kind of giving us a little bit different information, but maybe closer to what we're trying to get. So here we are now. We got the funding source, we know which vendor, and we know what the total is. And by using that financial report we ran originally, we now can say with certainty here that the $300 encumbrance is from Allstop. This might not be very easy to do if we had more than this one encumbrance, right? Most of us might have multiple line items with encumbrances, or in a single line item, multiple vendors. So this might not be a reasonable way to look for our balances by a vendor. So the next report I list is this General Ledger Dimension Balances report. So it's a pretty comprehensive way to get balances. It's then give us the total open encumbrances for the period we put in. And we get to see vendor, line item, funding source, any of the dimension information that we want to include. So we're going to go to General Ledger, and under the Reports column, Dimension Balances. We need to tell Intacct the period of time we're looking. So we can choose from the drop-down box one of the periods, or we can just type in the period. So let's look for fiscal year 21. Which reporting book do we want to use? It defaults to accrual, which is where our actual expenses can be found. So we're not looking for our actual expenses, we're looking for our encumbrances. So we're going to look at other books. So I'm going to select encumbrances. It now wants to combine the accrual book and encumbrance books, but I don't want to do that. I only want encumbrances, so I'm going to uncheck that box. I have actual selected, and that's all we're using, so that's all I need to see. We can choose a range of accounts or a single account, multiple accounts. I'm going to go for all accounts, and I'm entering an account group. All EXP GL accounts, or all expense general ledger accounts. And we'll continue using the same checkbook program funding source. We were wanting a specific vendor, we could add the vendor here. We can leave that blank. If you've used this before for the dimension values, you might already have criteria here. If you haven't, it's going to look like this: show dimension values, select. So as you can see, I've used it before, so Intacct remembered what options I've used. So it'll do the same for you. But if we wanted to include a combination of this report, we want to get the balance total by a line item, but we also want the vendor like we did from this report. We can combine that on this dimension balance report. So I'm going to select from this list the stuff I want to see built into the report. And the first thing I pick is how it's going to start sorting. Then the second thing is how it's going to sort in the third. So if you've used Excel before and sorted through multiple columns, this is the same concept. I want to see the funding source ID, the account ID, our line that we used, and maybe the vendor ID and name. We can display this differently, side by side or cascaded, show subtotals or show a grand total, which those would be valuable if we have a lot of breaks in this report if you're running multiple funding sources for this one. This one's just one funding source. So now let's view this. Now we have the funding source, the line item, and the vendor. But calling back to our screenshots or our slides from previous, this could still be an unpaid voucher. It could be a purchase order that's not converted. It could be a lot of different things. So now that we know who the balances are for, what's another way we can look? And that's the purchasing transaction detail report that you would find in the report center. And just like this dimension balance report, what period of time do we want to use? Well, we're looking for FY20. What's our checkbook? What's our program? Here's our funding source. We've gotten a little bit more information now from this report. We know that this is for all stuff and our office supplies line. And we can choose the state of our documents here. So if we're looking for something that's pending, we can choose a type of document, but we can only choose one at a time. So I'm going to leave that alone. We're just going to look for anything pending for all of this information. We're going to view the report, and then the result we get is that $300 purchase order that's still pending from August that needs action to be taken in the next 2 weeks. I'm not sure how fast Allstop bills our programs when they make a purchase, so it's possible we haven't got an invoice yet to pay. But in just a few short minutes here, we've been able to identify the purchasing document that's creating that encumbrance that's sitting out there for us. Starting from here. And we ended on this screen with a link to the PO, the vendor, the date it was created. Now we can go right into that PO and start taking action on what we want to do with it. If we need to print this out, we need to identify it, and then now we can go close this or make a payment. Okay. Any questions about any of these reports we just went through? Okay. So in addition to these reports, purchasing transaction detail, encumbrance by vendor or a financial report, or the dimension balances report, we can also use our own purchasing workflows to actually find these documents. So if we were going to look for our purchase requisitions or contract service requisitions, a purchasing list view is a pretty fast way to start looking for this stuff. So we're going to go to purchasing, and instead of going right to where standard purchase requisition is, we're going to go to view transactions. Now, depending on how much activity your program has, that's going to vary on the results on screen. So here we can see when I get here, me and the other employees of finance, we're going to see 446,000 purchasing transactions. So 447 pages for me since I list 999 transactions per page. That's going to be a lot for us to go through and a lot for you to go through. But if we're looking for something specific about our purchase requisitions or our contract requisitions, we can look for stuff that we know, if those things say they're pending, that's our sign that we need to do something about it. And we can filter all of that here on screen without having to run through a bunch of different reports. If we use the purchasing transaction detail report, we'd have to run that report twice. Here we can do this once. So there's an option on the screen called Advanced Filter. And we're going to say we want the date to be less or equal to 9/30/2021. So we don't want it in the current fiscal year. We want it to be no later than 9/30/2021. We can add another filter to say we want it to be greater than 10/1/20. So now we're zeroing in. We only want it to happen within fiscal year 21. And that can work for any date period that you want to use. And this can work, of course, for this year too, but we're looking specifically for fiscal year 21. State, what's the document state we want to look for? You know what, we want to look for pending documents. And what's the transaction type? And we're going to use includes as an option because this is going to be more than one. So we want to look up standard purchase requisition. When I insert a comma that's telling Intacct, we're going to add a second query on this particular one. And we're going to look up contract services requisition. And so we have to type that exactly the type of transaction they are. And so now we're saying to the purchasing screen, give us any transactions that are for standard purchase requisition or contract service requisition, where the document state is pending and it occurred between 10/1/2020 and 9/30/2021. So we went from 446,000 items on my screen to 15. And so what we see here is mostly standard purchase requisitions and one contract that staff has gotten approval for and have never taken the next step to get these paid or closed, going back to October 21st to as late as the end of September. And so now that we've found these, now we know, depending on your screen, some of you sitting here might not have any of these in your workflow, but if we work for any of these programs, there's action we have to take to get rid of these off our encumbrances to free up the funds on our budgets. And more importantly, for the grant programs, if these are requisitions we're not going to use, we certainly don't want to have these reported as unliquidated obligations or whatever the term is on the 425s. So now we'd have to convert this into a purchase order. So let's do that. I'll use 9/30 as the date for my purchase order. That was called. So here's that one I created here. So now I got to close this to get rid of that encumbrance. Going to continue to use 9/30/21. If I use a date now, the encumbrance will clear in this fiscal year, and our reports will still report an encumbrance in fiscal year 21. Our fiscal year 22 reports and budget will show a credit. It's going to give us the warning. Please make sure the transaction date you're using is the correct fiscal year. If it's correct, go ahead and click post. That's our last chance to fix our closed partial POs. And with that, we've fixed one of those 15 pending requisitions sitting out there waiting for action. And functionally, we can do the same things with purchase orders, our contract service purchase orders. Use the same filters. So we want the dates to be between 10/1 and 9/30. We want it to include purchase order. And the state, we're going to use a bunch of different states for this one. Pending purchase orders are stuff waiting for us. And you can see I've done this before, so it's the browser is asking me if I want to use what I've typed before. Partially converted purchase order is a blanket PO we haven't fully exhausted. In progress means we've converted the document into a voucher or justification, but drafted it, or a draft purchase order. So now we have a list of the 513 purchase orders that are still waiting for us to take action on in fiscal year 21. So now we can review these, review the ones on your list, make a determination of what you need to do with that, whether it's close or pay, whatever it is you need to do. But some sort of action needs to be taken rather than letting these sit there. And this is an order by the most recent back through the oldest one. So I can click the date column and reorder this basically now back to the oldest one. So we have a Turtle Creek one from over a year ago that hasn't been paid. So if we want to close it, we're going to convert it to a closed partial PO. We're going to change that date. There's nothing else we need to change on this. We'll click post and get that same message. Make sure that the date you're using is for the correct fiscal year. If it's correct, go ahead and click post. If not, make your change and click post. Now we've taken care of that business. And so that's our purchase orders and our contract service POs, and how you can look and find those and take action right away for those before it becomes a problem in 2 weeks. If any of these are things that we haven't used, like the one that's over a year old, they have a hold on our budget. So if you're trying to pay other bills, this may end up interfering with your request to pay something. So we certainly don't want those just sitting there. And we can think of the same thing for vouchers. Vouchers that are waiting for approval, if they're submitted or partially approved, encumbrance is not going to release yet, but we know it's on the way to getting released, so we're probably not going to pay too much mind to those. But vouchers that are declined or sitting as drafts means we've stopped the whole workflow process, and now it's waiting for us to do something about it. So let's look for that. If we have a state that says it's equal to declined, maybe we're only looking for stuff in October and November. We don't want to look for the whole fiscal year. And the state's going to be the voucher. So we've got voucher as our state, declined in between October 1 and November 30th. So we have a handful of different vouchers sitting out here declined. So if we look at this oldest one here for $77, we know that this was declined back in October of 2020, and we haven't taken any action since then to correct why it was declined. If we've paid this in another form, that hasn't helped us with what our encumbrance is holding on this one. So there's something we have to do. We either need to edit this document, make whatever corrections that were needed, and then resubmit it so that it can be processed for payment. Or if we're not going to pay it, we've paid it in another form, we need to get rid of this declined voucher so the encumbrance will clear and the accounting for our funding source and the fiscal year is correct. So we've got a couple of steps we have to take. Actually, first, we're going to get the purchase order number from this. So if I go to the history tab, we can see actually, we're going to have a lot of declined vouchers for this. So we have purchase order 42916. Its current status is converted. So if we were looking for our pending purchase orders, we're not going to find that because it's been fully converted out. But our vouchers have all been declined back in October and November. So if we're going to get rid of the encumbrance that's related to this, which from the voucher screen, we can see that the purchase order was $700, we need to take action with all three of these vouchers. And the action that we want to take is we're going to choose one of those vouchers, or if all of them are on screen, which they are. So we have those three here. To fix this, if they're not going to be paid, we would delete those vouchers. That purchase order said it was converted. So we're going to clear our filters because we no longer need to worry about these vouchers between October and November. We want to look at a purchase order now. That purchase order is now to partially converted. Now it wants us to take action. And we're going to close that. Using 9/30/21 as the date since the transaction originated in fiscal year 21. There's our reminder about using the correct period for the date. And now we resolve the issue with the declined vouchers for that particular transaction. And the same thing goes for the justifications. We can search for justification workflow instead of for voucher, find our declined justifications if they came from a voucher, or excuse me, a purchase order. If the justification is a standalone one, then it's never created an encumbrance. We wouldn't worry too much about the declined ones there. Unless it's something we need to get paid, we can edit that, correct it, and submit. Now our closed partial POs, we're going to move to the closed partial PO workflow. So I'm going to purchasing, order, and close partial PO. On this list, we have just short of 10,000 closed partial POs for the life of Intacct. We can use the advanced filters to say we're only interested in stuff that was closed this fiscal year. So fiscal year 2021, or excuse me, 2022. So I'm saying give me anything with a date greater or equal to 10/1/21. We've cut this from almost 10,000 down to 69 transactions. And on Friday, I ran a couple of reports to figure out how many of these might have been dated incorrectly. On Friday, it was 66 of them. So as program users, we need to visit this screen here and double check our work that we've done. But some of the names I've seen drop off, so somebody's been here fixing some of their issues. So if we look at this closed partial PO here for $800, as users, we need to go in here and take a look-see and see what we did. We used a November 2nd, 2021 date, but when we go to the history of this transaction, the requisition was actually created in 7/27/2021. So our encumbrance was created in fiscal year 21, but we closed it and used the date of November 2nd. So our release happened in fiscal year 2022. Basically meaning our fiscal year report for 21 is going to be incorrect. And then obviously 22 is also incorrect from this one date. So I want to show what's going to happen here when we fix this. So we have that dimension balances report. We'll leave it in fiscal year 21. It's for 70400. And close some of these other screens. So I'm using just one account number. We're going to use the program that's on here, 455 operator main, 50 is the checkbook. And the vendor is Dakota Supply Group. So we're going to specify a vendor in this instance. So we have $2,400 in open encumbrances here, of which we are pretty much know right now $800 hasn't cleared properly. So if I correct this date to 9/30, our expectation is for fiscal year 21 that $2,400 will change to $1,600. We've got the date, and we're going to post this. Get our reminder, make sure our dates are correct. Now, if you make a correction like I have here, most instances it's not immediate. So if I view this, it might take Intacct a couple of minutes to update because now behind the scenes, all the journal entries are changing for what we've done. So we'll wait a few minutes while that's changing. Does anybody have questions about the closed partial POs, using the advanced filters, any of those things? All right, so our balance has gone from 2,400 to 1,600 now that we've correctly closed that purchase order. When we come back to our list though, we moved that list from 69 down to 68, and like I said, there was quite a handful last week. The vast majority of these weren't dated correctly. So as users, if you're sitting in here now and you see your name on this list of transactions, double check your activity and make that correction like I did on that one. And if you need to, have the financial report or dimension balance report up here, check it as you're going to make sure what you're expecting to happen is actually happening. All right. We're going to move on to the next part, which is the paid travel advances. So we're going to go into the paid travel advance workflow. And this is the stage our travel is at. If it's waiting for you to reconcile, it's going to be pending or it might be in progress. So we can use the same advanced filters. We can say, we're working in fiscal year 21, so give me everything less or equal to 9/30 of 21. And maybe the state on this document is going to equal pending. Actually, or in progress. We want to include both pending and in progress. So right now we have nothing from fiscal year 21 that's pending reconciliation, other than something from 2016. So Lisa's working to fix that one. I showed her this morning. Lisa asked if the travel request was dated 9/30 and it should have been in October, can the document be edited? The travel request can't be edited. None of our requests or vouchers can be edited once they've been approved. The date that was put on there is going to be the date that all the accounting is going to base itself off of. So our options then are either going to be to request that the monitor do a couple of different journal entries to reclassify it from one fiscal year to the other, or to close that activity in the same fiscal year it was created. So check for any paid travel advances that are sitting out here as pending, if you have any. Doesn't look like we do, so fiscal year 21 is sitting good for travel. We can go to our travel reconciliations, which is also under the order workflow. So right above paid travel advances reconciliation. If we're looking for reconciliations that have been declined, aren't approved, so they might be declined or drafted, we can do the same thing. We'll use our state to include declined, draft, and our date less or equal to 9/30 of 2021. And so it's just that one from 2016. So our travels are looking pretty good right now for our balances. So our only worries are going to be sitting out there are our closed partial POs, our pending purchase orders, that list of pending requisitions that we have to be looking for. Okay, do we have any other questions? This is being recorded, so when the video is available, I'll make sure to email this out to you guys, especially using these advanced filters. If you don't have experience like in Excel, could be a pretty new concept to you about using these filters to really dig into the stuff on your screen. And the nice part about using these filters is if we're happy with this, so we know that this one is where the state includes declined or draft, and the date is less or equal to 9/30/2021. This is a one-time filter. So if I leave the screen and come back, that goes away. I have to build it again. If you want to save that so you don't have to keep doing that, so you copy it from the video or you've been making notes to do this, I can go to Manage Views and save this view as. So if I called it FY21 training, that view is now here and would work in perpetuity for you. So you can always use this view, as you finish out the rest of your fiscal year 21 business. And then when we move on to the next fiscal year, and we're working on that, you can edit the view you've just created, use those advanced filters, and then change the date to now 9/30/2022. Or if we have a range of dates, change the range of dates, and now it's just fiscal year 22. All right, I don't see any other questions or anything coming in, so we can end the video here. Thank you everyone for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.